Raising the Conversation, Season 3, Tomorrow's Church, a podcast by the MacRae Centre for Faith and Culture at Acadia Divinity College, with your host Joel Murphy, facilitator of trend research and analysis here at the MacRae Centre.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Raising the Conversation podcast. My name is Joel Murphy, the facilitator of trend research and analysis here at the Futuring Hub within the MacRae Centre at Acadia Divinity College. And I'm very excited to be able to welcome our president, Reverend Dr. Anna Robbins, to this conversation. Dr. Robbins is the president of Acadia Divinity College, the dean of Theology at Acadia University, and is a really sought after person to talk to. And so it's great that she's in our building and we can have this conversation. So first of all, thank you, Anna, for taking time. I know things are busy, but maybe we'll just hop right into it and then we can see where it goes.
Yeah, it's always a pleasure, Joel. Thanks for the invitation to contribute. Love it.
Yeah, it's good. All right, so starting off, I know that given with all the change that we're seeing around the world, many leaders in different industries are engaging with what's called futures thinking. And I know for some individuals within the Christian context or Christian churches within the church, futures thinking might be unfamiliar. However, I know that you've been doing some work around this, obviously, based on the fact I have my job and there's other things happening within the college. So when did you first find it, futures thinking, and how have you leveraged it at Acadia Divinity College? And why do you think it's so important for today's Christian leaders to consider and engage with this kind of approach to thinking about the future?
Thanks for the question, Joel. I think, we think that the world is changing so rapidly, and it is. There are new things that are coming that are disruptive in dramatic ways for us. But the world has always been changing. Nothing ever stays exactly the same. I think it's the nature of human existence. We're creatures of change. Change happens. We thrive on change. And I think I think it comes from growing up on the shores of the Bay of Fundy, actually, that the tide comes in and the tide goes out. And for me, every time the tide came in and went out, it left treasures, on the sea floor. And I could go and discover these things and find new things that the tide had brought every time it changed. And so I think the vibrancy of that has shaped my soul a little bit and meant that as I was called into ministry and embarked in church ministry in the earliest days and theological training, the question of how we can do things in ways that connect with people how they are today was something that has always intrigued me. So, I was always doing experimental stuff, in ministry and kind of pushing out the boundaries, sometimes for good and sometimes for ill. Let's face it, when you're young, you'll try things that probably you shouldn't, but then you learn by doing. And thankfully, I was surrounded by people in churches who encouraged the experiment and didn't judge too harshly when it didn't go well. And I'm grateful for them because that contributed a lot to my formation. But when I went to the UK, after we pastored for a while in the Annapolis Valley, we went to the UK for me to do my PhD, and questions that I had started to continue to percolate with me while I was studying as a student at ADC continued there. I became very interested in culture while I was here before I left, very interested in the ways that culture itself changes and has an impact on people. And so when I went to do my PhD studies, that was something that was still always a little bit in the back of my mind. Then my first academic job was on the faculty of the London School of Theology. And it was there that I got exposed to a group called the Tomorrow Network, at the time led by Mike Moyna and Richard Worsley. And being exposed to the Tomorrow Network was really helpful to me because it gave a little bit of a structure for some of those things that interested me about how we change and how we adapt to change. And Tomorrow Network had this approach of intentional futuring for the church, looking at, different trends and so on, and then putting out potential competing scenarios. And so they would maybe talk about, the emergence of the internet. I mean, I'm really old. So then it was like the emergence of the internet. What is the impact this is going to have on the church and on theological education? And then they'd present two scenarios. Either this is going to happen or that's going to happen. They weren't saying that either of those things were definitely going to happen. But what that did was it gave you a sense of imagination. This could happen or this could happen. but anything in between could also happen. And so becoming part of a few of those conversations gave a little bit of structure to that for me, but it still wasn't in my mind that it was a discipline, futures thinking or something. Just always been oriented that way, I guess. And for me, I think there's also a prophetic side to it on the spiritual side that I think that not that I'm given visions necessarily at all, but I think some of us have really good instincts about picking up the things in culture that that matter and that are going to have a lasting impact, and then being able to project forward what that's going to look like. And you might say, well, why do we need to do that at all as Christians? I mean, we know that Jesus holds the future, and so let's not worry about that. And I believe, of course, that Jesus holds the future, and there's a glorious future awaiting for those disciples of Christ. However, there's also a life we live here on this planet with the earth under our feet and the air in our nostrils, and we have to live and minister here. And as we live and minister here, we can do that with an ignorance to what's unfolding around us and what's happening next, and always be playing catch up. And this is one thing that's always frustrated me about the church and maybe about theologies. We always seem to be trying to catch up, responding to stuff when it's already passed. And it just seemed to me that maybe we can do better at that. Maybe we can actually read these signals and see these signs and prepare ourselves to speak into the good news of Jesus, the gospel, into the present situation, and not only into the past, as hard as we trying to catch up. And so let's be prepared, let's be equipped, let's lead the way rather than follow. And it's just that confidence, I guess, that's how the church could be and maybe should be, to be able to lead these things in culture rather than always playing catch up. That's a really long answer to what was a simple question, Joel.
No, I think it's great. I think it highlights, like, obviously there's been even in your own process, right? Like, and naturally, I think you're an innovator. You're somebody who likes to try things. You have this creative capacity to think and consider what could be, and you're not willing and acknowledging that sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. Like, that's an important part of it. And then thinking about your experience in the UK and how that then informed and opened your mind to the idea of futures thinking, I think is a helpful narrative and understanding that this is an ongoing journey of, some people are naturally good at this, I think, which you are, but it's just something we can become exposed to and learn. Like you said, we can be equipped, we can be empowered, we can then, instead of being reactive, we can be proactive as the church. And we can hold that tension, recognizing that, like, Jesus holds the future. And it really dovetails really well into the second question around what theological insights do you believe are most critical for Christian leaders to hold onto as they engage with futures thinking? How can these insights, and then the follow-up part of it is, like, how can these insights help guide the church in a way forward that is both faithful but also forward thinking? And you've articulated a few of them, but what are kind of big things that come to you when you think about that?
Yeah, I think that we can become most faithful when we're looking forward and understanding what changes are taking place, so that we're able to actually do that reflective work in process and not just after the fact, and say, oh, well, we would have done this differently, or maybe we would have done that differently. We hope that we will learn from the past, but one thing we've learned from the past is that we don't learn from the past. So we do have to keep leading into that. Theological insights. I think some of the work that you do, Joel, identifies kind of the types of personalities and how we respond to the future. And I think there are a lot of people that I encounter who are either fearful of the future or very uncertain about how much we should think about it. And they become very wary of those of us who are like, yeah, let's talk about the future. And I think that being naturally that kind of person helps me to maybe frame it theologically. Oh, yay.
Thumbs up.
I'm glad they agree. So I think that that for me, the theological insights are crucial to the whole program, in that I think that for example, we're created in the image of God, and as created in the image of God, the creation belongs together. There's a unity to creation, our dependence on the earth and the land and our interrelationality is something that forms a basic kind of foundation for our theology. And so as we look to the future, we have an agenda as well, right? So how do we reconcile relationships? How do we identify new kinds of brokenness so that we can identify new kinds of relatedness to overcome some of the brokenness? So that's kind of in the big theme stuff. But I would also say that, I believe in very much in the presence of God in his world, the presence of Christ, the presence of the Spirit of Christ in the world. And so it's not like we're here left trying to scrabble our way through this veil of tears. I mean, we're sent here as ambassadors on a mission. And when you're sent as an ambassador on a mission, you're sent with a briefing, right? Here's the kinds of people you're going to find. Here's the culture you're serving, and here's things you should do and shouldn't do, and so on. And I just think that looking to the future, if we're sent as ambassadors, we need to be prepared to be ambassadors for that future. And so I think it's incumbent upon us. I think also tackling fear, we don't need to be afraid. Yes, God holds the future. God will be present no matter what the future is. But I'm not just looking for the escape route. I'm sent here on a mission to do this mission while I'm here. I'm not just here putting in time waiting for heaven. Do you see what I mean? So if that is the case, then I think part of our mission has to be, how are we best prepared? How are we best equipped to serve the mission of Jesus in this world while we're here? And while we're here, we're going to see a heck of a lot of change. We're going to see lots of things happen that we don't necessarily understand well. And yet that mission is still the same. How are we being sent as ambassadors of reconciliation into this context, into the context where we're asked to serve? We might not have chosen it, but we can't rebel against it because God has chosen it for us. So, mission accepted or not. And if it's not, well, we know what happens then, really, right? I mean, you're absenting yourself really from what God has asked you to do and placed in front of you.
I think that's such an interesting and important point around how are we're in this space, like we are in this point in time, we are moving through this current reality wherever we are, whether that's in like Atlantic Canada or across Canada or in the world. And then how do we, I think your emphasis of how do we faithfully respond in the midst of that is really important. And it's an embodied piece. It's a recognition of we're still, even if we don't like where we are, or we're struggling to understand or don't appreciate the changes that are happening around us, we are still called to be on mission in our space, or called to be the church where we are in our point in time. And I think it's an element of faithfulness in the midst of that. I think that, as we've talked, I think has been really helpful for me.
We have to understand, Joel, I think our enculturated nature as human beings. We're not, when we become Christians, we're not somehow lifted, up in some balloon out of our culture. We continue to be part of our culture and the world in which we're placed in this place and time. And so we might not like everything that we experience. Some things might overwhelm us, but God goes before us and with us, so we don't need to be overwhelmed and afraid. I think when we're overwhelmed and afraid, sometimes what we do is we shut down and we withdraw rather than engage fully in the mission that God's given us to do. And then we put up barriers instead of reconcilers. We're wall builders. And that's when we start to fragment as Christians. And I don't think that does us really any favors at all. I mean, I think scriptures are clear in many points, both in the Old and the New Testaments, that there's this wonderful opportunity God gives us to read the signs of what's coming and to be prepared, and then to step into that with our eyes wide open, and willing to take the risk. There's a risk to it, there's no question, but there's a risk either way. Choose your risk. The risk of avoiding what's in front of us, or the risk of engaging it in the name of Jesus. So the second one enthuses me a lot more. I'm not a hider, I guess, although sometimes we all have days when that's exactly what we'd like to do.
Yeah, no, I think that's a helpful spot, an important recognition. And I think that's why I feel like a part of this, even thinking about the future as a Christian, is almost an act of faithfulness. It's a recognition of God is going before me and in this space, and I can be courageous in the midst of this.
I agree, Joel. And I think part of what people find difficult maybe is they say, quote scriptures that talk about how we don't know tomorrow necessarily, but God does, and so we just move faithfully into it. And yes, of course we do. As much as we do futures thinking, these are not fail-safe, predictions. This is what's going to happen for sure. We're just saying we're reading the signs. And as Jesus told the Pharisees in the Gospel of Matthew, he said, you read the signs around you. You see when the sky is red at night and it's going to be a nice day the next day, and you see it's a red sky in the morning, it's not going to be good weather. He said, but you look around the signs and you're not reading them, the signs of the times. And so the challenge is ever before us. When we look around us, can we see with the eyes of faith the signs of the times and read them in a way that is faithful to the scriptures and faithful to what it means to walk well with God and each other? And I think that can be it can help us to be faithful if we have a sense of what's happening. But we never think when we're doing futuring, this is absolutely what's going to happen, although there are degrees of confidence certainly about things. And when we're confident about something, I think we should act confidently. And when we're less confident about something, maybe we should tread a bit more lightly. But the signs are there to be read. So what fun.
I love that. Oh, and it's so good. And in terms of like wrapping up our time and concluding this conversation, because I feel like we could talk for forever.
Okay.
Yeah. And I know you're. Well, I'll just ask the question. When thinking about the future church, where do you find hope? I know a lot of times, like you've mentioned, thinking about the future, we can be fearful or concerned about the future of the church in Canada. But where are you finding hope?
Finding hope in the future of the church is in the very phrase, the future of the church. I find the whole process hopeful. When we think about the future, we're expecting the church will be there. When we think about, what is the future of the church? We're not saying, the church is therefore going to die. We're saying there's a future for the church. What's it going to look like? How can we be ready for that? How can we as a seminary educate students who come here to be prepared for their ministry? How can we do that to the best ways possible for what they're being called to do? And so the whole thing is about hope. It's because we know that the church will be here in some form. Might not be a form we recognize today. Who knows? Who knows what it could look like? But that's exciting because we know that God is still at work. We know the church will still be here. And the question isn't, oh dear, how will we fit in? It's how can we serve that reality that God is still at work in the world, that God's church is still thriving and carrying out the mission that he's given us to be ambassadors of reconciliation. And so I think the whole thing is an expression of hope, an embodied hope. And excites me to no end because it means we're still part of it and God's still saying, come on, we got things to do. And that's pretty exciting as far as I'm concerned. And the whole thing is about hope.
I love that.
When I've often asked when people talk about hope and I say, what is hope anyway? And people will say, well, hope. And I'm like, I don't know, what is hope? And for me, hope is when dead things live, right? That's hope. That's Jesus. Dead things live. And still there's no church too far gone. There's no person wandered too far away. There's no future where God isn't. That's hope. Dead things live. That's hope. And we have that to share with people everywhere.
Oh, it's so good. I love that. Hope is when dead things live. Yeah. I think we'll conclude it there. Anna, as always, thank you so much for your insights, for your enthusiasm, for your I think your honesty around this. I think obviously it's nuanced and you're wise and you thought about these things, but it's also a level of honesty and transparency around there is hope in this work and in thinking about this. And I really appreciate you sharing that with us.
I hope it's a hope generator. Thanks so much. It's been a pleasure to chat with you today.